The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the dark between three different star systems, like a giant metal flower, with arms reaching out in all directions. Ships from dozens of worlds docked at its ports every day, bringing traders and buyers and sellers from across the galaxy. Today was special because the famous Galactic Exotic Acquisitions auction was happening, and beings from the richest corners of space had come to bid on the rarest treasures the universe had to offer. Jack Morrison wiped grease from his hands with an old rag as he walked to the crowded auction halls. The human mechanic had only come here to bid on some surplus starship engines that were being sold in Lot 47, but the main auction was hard to ignore. Everywhere he looked there were creatures and artifacts that most people would never see in their entire lives. Blue-skinned Altarians in flowing robes examined ancient crystals that hummed with power, while six-armed Vex Corp executives poked at caged creatures with electronic prods to test their reactions. The auction hall itself was a massive dome with rows of seats arranged in circles going down toward a central stage where a professional auctioneer was presenting the items for sale. The auctioneer was a tall, thin creature with 4 eyes and skin that changed colors when he got excited about high bids. His voice boomed through speakers in dozens of languages at once, so every species could understand what was being offered. Jack found a seat in the back near some other humans who had come to buy mining equipment. He checked his tablet for the time until Lot 47 would come up and settled in to watch the show. The current item was a set of living art sculptures from the artist world of Prism that shifted and changed shape based on the emotions of people nearby. The bidding was intense, with several Altarian collectors driving the price higher and higher until it sold for more credits than Jack made in 5 years. Next came weapons from various warrior cultures, including energy swords that could cut through starship hulls and plasma rifles that never needed recharging. The Chronari military buyers were very interested in these items, and their bidding war with some private collectors got so heated that station security had to remind everyone about the no-violence policy inside the auction hall. Then the auctioneer announced the item that everyone had been talking about in the corridors and market areas of the station. Ladies and gentlemen and beings of all classifications, we now present Lot 33, a genuine battle dragon, from the legendary warrior world of Drakmor. The stage platform began to rise, and Jack heard gasps and whispers from all around the hall. What appeared was indeed a dragon, but not the kind that the old legends described. This dragon was enormous, but not in a way that inspired fear and respect. Her scales had once been deep red like rubies, but now they looked dull and faded. Her body was so large and round that she could barely lift her massive head off the platform. Her wings were folded against her sides and looked too weak to support her weight, even if she could stand up properly. The dragon's name was Ember according to the information display that appeared above the stage, but she looked nothing like the fierce creature that name suggested. Her eyes were half closed and seemed filled with sadness rather than the burning intelligence that dragons were famous for. When she tried to move her head to look at the crowd, her breathing was heavy and labored like even that small effort was difficult. The auctioneer tried his best to make her sound impressive. This magnificent specimen weighs approximately 12,000 pounds and measures 42 feet from nose to tail tip. Dragons from Drakmor are known throughout the galaxy for their loyalty, intelligence, and combat abilities. The starting bid is set at 50,000 credits. The hall fell silent. Jack could see buyers throughout the audience examining the dragon with expressions of disappointment and disgust. A wealthy Altarian collector who had been bidding aggressively on earlier items shook his head and turned away. 2 Vex executives were whispering to each other and pointing at the dragon's swollen belly while making notes on their tablets. From somewhere in the middle section, a Chronari warlord stood up and shouted, "What use is a dragon that cannot fly or fight? This creature is worthless for battle." Other voices joined in with similar complaints. "She cannot even stand properly," called out another bidder. "How could she carry a rider into combat?" asked someone else. "This is not a war dragon. This is an overfed pet." The auctioneer's skin shifted to nervous yellow colors as he tried to maintain order. Please, esteemed bidders, let us remember that dragons are long-lived creatures, and with proper care and training the specimen could return to fighting condition. But the damage was done. Jack watched as potential buyers continued to examine the dragon and then lose interest. He could see why they were disappointed. Battle dragons were supposed to be symbols of power and strength. They were purchased by wealthy collectors to show off their status or by military organizations to serve as living weapons. This dragon looked like she could barely move, let alone fight. The auctioneer lowered the starting bid to 30,000 credits, then 20,000, then 15,000. Still no one raised their hand. Jack found himself studying the dragon more carefully, while the auctioneer grew more desperate. There was something about her that the other bidders were missing. Despite her obvious physical problems, her eyes still held a spark of intelligence. When she looked out at the crowd, Jack could see that she understood exactly what was happening and how the beings in the audience saw her. 10,000 credits, called the auctioneer. Surely someone recognizes the potential value of this rare creature. A few half-hearted bids came from the back of the hall, but Jack could tell they were not serious. One Alterian bid 11,000, probably just to avoid the embarrassment of having no bids at all. A Vex executive countered with 12,000, but when the auctioneer asked for 13,000, the hall fell silent again. Jack looked around at all the wealthy and powerful beings who had dismissed the dragon as worthless. They saw only her current condition and could not imagine anything different. But Jack was a mechanic, and mechanics were trained to see potential in broken things. Every day he took machines that other people had given up on and found ways to make them work again. This dragon was not broken beyond repair, she was just neglected and mistreated. The auctioneer was getting desperate. The bid stands at 12,000 credits, going once, going twice. Jack raised his hand. The gesture surprised him as much as anyone else. He had not planned to bid on anything except those ship engines. He certainly had not planned to spend most of his savings on a dragon that everyone else considered worthless. But something about the way Ember looked at the crowd with such dignity, despite her circumstances, made him act without thinking. 13,000 credits from the human in Section 12, announced the auctioneer, who sounded relieved to have any bid at all. The Vex executive, who had bid 12,000, looked back at Jack with all 6 of his arms crossed. He studied the human for a moment, then shook his head and sat down. Apparently, he was not willing to get into a bidding war over what he considered a worthless purchase. 13,000, going once, going twice, sold to the human bidder. Laughter rippled through the auction hall. Jack could hear beings making jokes about the foolish human who had just bought an overgrown, useless pet. Some of the comments were in languages he did not understand, but the tone made their meaning clear. A few humans from his own section looked at him like he had lost his mind. As Jack made his way down to the payment area to complete the transaction, he noticed that Ember was watching him. For the first time since she had been brought onto the stage, her eyes were fully open and focused. There was something in her gaze that might have been curiosity or even hope. The payment process took longer than expected because the auction house had not prepared proper transport containers for a 12,000-pound dragon. Jack had to sign extra forms taking responsibility for any damage she might cause, and agreeing to cover additional shipping costs to get her to his home on Haven's Edge. While he waited for the paperwork, Jack walked over to the holding area, where Ember was resting. Up close, she was even more impressive despite her condition. Her scales were still beautiful even though they had lost their shine, and her claws were sharp and well-maintained. Someone had been taking basic care of her, even if they had been overfeeding her terribly. "Hello there," Jack said quietly so as not to startle her. Ember lifted her massive head and looked directly at him. Dragons were supposed to be highly intelligent, and Jack could see that intelligence in her eyes, even through the sadness and exhaustion. "I know you probably do not understand me, but I want you to know that things are going to be different now," Jack continued. "I am not like your previous owners, and I am not going to treat you like a trophy or a weapon or a curiosity." The dragon tilted her head slightly as if she was listening carefully to his words. Jack had heard that some dragons could understand basic galactic common, even if they could not speak it. "My name is Jack, and I fix things for a living," he said. "Broken ships, broken machines, broken anything really, and I think maybe I might be able to help fix whatever's been done to you." Ember made a low, rumbling sound that was not quite a growl, but not quite a purr either. Jack chose to interpret it as cautious interest rather than a threat. The transport arrangements were finally completed, and Jack watched as a specialized hover platform carried Ember toward the docking bay, where his own small cargo ship was waiting. As they moved through corridors of the station, other beings stopped to stare and point at the human who had bought the fat dragon. Jack did not care about their opinions. He had made his choice, and he was committed to seeing it through. He had no idea how he was going to care for a 12,000-pound dragon, or whether she could ever return to proper health. But he was going to try. After all, fixing impossible things was what he did best. The journey to Haven's Edge took 3 days in Jack's cargo ship, and during that time, Ember barely moved from the specially reinforced holding area he had prepared for her. The dragon lay on her side, breathing heavily, and only lifted her head when Jack brought food or water. She ate very little despite her massive size, which worried Jack, because he had expected a creature that large to have an enormous appetite. Haven's Edge was a frontier colony world on the outer rim, where about 200 humans had settled to start new lives away from the crowded core worlds. The planet had decent air and water and enough mineral resources to support a small community, but was far from major trade routes, which made it perfect for people who wanted to be left alone. Jack had chosen this place 5 years ago after leaving his old life behind, and he had built a modest repair facility where he fixed ships and equipment for the other colonists. When Jack's ship landed at the small spaceport, the entire colony seemed to turn out to see what he had brought back from his supply run. Word had already spread to the community's communication network that Jack Morrison had bought something unusual at the auction, and everyone was curious to see what it was. The reaction when Ember was moved from the ship to Jack's workshop was exactly what he had expected. Most of the colonists had never seen a dragon before, and their first response was amazement at her size and obvious intelligence. But that amazement quickly turned confusion and concern when they realized her condition. "Jack, what in the galaxy were you thinking?" asked Maria Santos, the colony's doctor, as she watched the hover platform carrying Ember disappear into the large workshop behind Jack's house. "That creature must weigh more than your entire building." "She needs help," Jack replied simply while checking the structural supports he had hastily installed to handle the dragon's weight. Nobody else was willing to give her a chance. Tom Bradley, who ran the colony's agricultural systems, shook his head in disbelief. "You spent your savings on a sick dragon when you could have bought that new fusion generator we all need for power grid." Other colonists gathered around to voice similar concerns. They were not cruel people, but Haven's Edge operated on tight budgets and limited resources. Everyone had to contribute to the community's survival, and Jack's mechanical skills were essential for keeping their equipment running. Spending money on what appeared to be a dying dragon struck many of them as irresponsible. Jack listened to their complaints without getting angry, because he understood their perspective. These people had trusted him to make practical decisions, and bringing home a 12,000-pound problem instead of useful supplies did seem crazy. But something deep inside told him this was the right thing to do, even if he could not explain it logically. Over the next few days, Jack learned just how challenging caring for a dragon could be. Ember was not hostile, but she was deeply depressed and suspicious of any kindness. When Jack approached with food, she would watch him carefully, as if expecting some kind of trick or punishment. She ate only small amounts and refused to move around the workshop, even though Jack had cleared plenty of space for her. The workshop itself had to be completely reorganized to accommodate her size. Jack moved his heaviest equipment to the outer walls and reinforced the floor with additional support beams. He installed better ventilation, because dragons apparently generated a lot of body heat, and the air in the enclosed space quickly became uncomfortable. The expense of these modifications ate into his remaining savings, but Jack was committed to making this work. What frustrated him most was Ember's obvious intelligence, combined with her refusal to communicate. Dragons were supposed to be highly social creatures who formed strong bonds with their companions, but Ember seemed determined to remain isolated and withdrawn. She would watch Jack work, but showed no interest in interacting with him beyond accepting food and water. Everything changed on the 4th day when Jack was repairing a broken atmospheric processor and accidentally knocked over a toolbox. The crash was loud and sudden, and Ember immediately raised her head and made a series of low rumbling sounds that almost sounded like words. Jack stopped what he was doing and looked at her carefully. "Did you just try to say something?" Ember's eyes focused on him with new intensity, and she made the rumbling sounds again. This time Jack was sure he heard something that might have been careful in heavily accented galactic common. "You can understand me," Jack said with excitement. "And you can speak." The dragon lowered her head as if she had revealed something she should have kept secret. But Jack was not going to let this opportunity pass. He walked slowly toward her and sat down on a crate about 10 feet away, where she could see him clearly, without feeling threatened. "There is no need to hide what you can do," Jack said gently. "I am not like your previous owners, and I will not punish you for being intelligent." For several minutes, they looked at each other in silence. Then Ember spoke again in that same rumbling voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Why are you by Broken Dragon?" The question hit Jack harder than he had expected, because it forced him to examine his own motivations. Why had he spent his savings on a creature that everyone else considered worthless? Why was he reorganizing his entire life around caring for someone he barely knew? "Because you are not broken," Jack finally answered. "You are hurt and sick and sad, but that is not the same thing as broken. Broken means something cannot be fixed, and I do not believe that about you." Ember was quiet for a long time, processing his words. When she spoke again, her voice was softer and filled with an emotion Jack had not heard before. "Previous owners say Ember worthless, fat, stupid dragon good only for entertainment." Jack felt anger building in his chest as he began to understand what had happened to her. "What kind of entertainment?" "Make Ember eat too much for crowds to watch," she said with shame obvious in her voice. "Laugh when Ember cannot fly, cannot move properly. Say fat dragon, funny dragon." The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place for Jack. Ember had not become obese through laziness or natural appetite. She had been systematically overfed and kept sedentary as a form of cruel entertainment. Her depression was not just from being mistreated, but from being humiliated and having her natural abilities taken away from her. How long did this go on? Jack asked, trying to keep his voice calm, even though he wanted to find her previous owners and make them pay for what they had done. "Many years," Ember replied. "Since Bonded Rider died in battle, Ember passed from owner to owner. Each one make things worse. Each one care only about credits or entertainment, never about Ember." Jack learned that dragons on Drakmor traditionally bonded with warriors in partnerships that lasted for life. When Ember's rider had been killed in combat, she had been sold as war surplus to pay his debts. From there, she had been traded between various owners who saw her only as a commodity to be exploited. "What was your rider's name?" Jack asked. "Called him Thomas," Ember said, and for the first time Jack heard warmth in her voice. "Good human like you, maybe. Treated Ember as partner, not as pet or weapon. We fly together, fight together, trust each other completely." Thomas was human. "Yes, many Drakmor warriors are human. Your species good at bonding with dragons because you see us as equals, not as animals to be controlled." This revelation gave Jack new insight into why he had felt compelled to help Ember. Humans and dragons apparently had a natural affinity for each other that went beyond simple master and pet relationships. Maybe his instinct to save her was not as crazy as everyone thought. Over the following days, Jack and Ember talked more and more as she began to trust him. She told him about her life before the trauma, about flying through clouds of Drakmor and the joy of perfect cooperation with her bonded rider. She described the shame and despair of being reduced to a circus attraction and the gradual loss of hope that anyone would ever see her as more than a curiosity. Jack shared his own story about being a military engineer who had grown tired of building weapons and decided to use his skills for peaceful purposes instead. He explained how he had come to Haven's Edge looking for a simple life, but had found a community of people who cared about each other despite their differences. "You help broken things," Ember observed after listening to his explanation. "Broken ships, broken equipment, now broken dragon." "You are not broken," Jack insisted again. "You are recovering, and there is a big difference." As they talked, Jack began to develop a plan for helping Ember regain her health and strength. It would not be easy, and it would require resources the colony could barely spare, but Jack was determined to prove that everyone who had dismissed her as worthless was wrong. The other colonists remained skeptical, but Jack noticed that some of them had started bringing small gifts for Ember. Maria brought medical supplies in case the dragon needed treatment. Tom brought fresh vegetables from the agricultural domes. Even the children started leaving drawings and flowers near the workshop entrance. Haven's Edge was slowly accepting its newest resident, even if they did not fully understand why Jack had brought her home. And for the first time since her rider's death years ago, Ember began to believe that maybe there were still good people in the galaxy who could see past her current condition to the proud dragon she used to be. The real work of rehabilitation was about to begin, and both Jack and Ember knew it would test everything they were learning about trust and partnership. But they also knew they would face those challenges together, which made all the difference in the world. Jack stood in his workshop early the next morning studying Ember as she slept and trying to figure out where to begin helping her recover. The dragon was so large that she took up most of the available floor space, but Jack could see that underneath all the excess weight, there was still the frame of a powerful creature. Her bones were strong, and her muscle structure was intact, even though it was buried under layers of fat from years of overfeeding and forced inactivity. The first challenge was simply getting Ember to move around more than she had been doing. Jack had read everything he could find about dragon physiology in the colony's database, and learned that dragons were naturally active creatures who needed regular exercise to maintain their health. Ember had been kept sedentary for so long that her muscles had weakened and her joints had stiffened, making movement painful and difficult. "Good morning, Ember," Jack said when she opened her eyes and looked around the workshop. "How are you feeling today?" "Same as always," she replied in her rumbling voice. Heavy, tired, sore everywhere. Jack had expected this answer, but it still made him sad to hear the resignation in her tone. "I have been thinking about ways to help you feel better, and I want to try some things if you are willing." Ember lifted her massive head and studied him with curiosity. Over the past week, she had begun to trust that Jack would not hurt her, but she was still cautious about anything that might involve effort or discomfort. "What kind of things?" she asked. "Movement," Jack said simply. "Your body needs to remember how to be strong again, and that means we need to start with small exercises that will not hurt you too much." The first attempts were frustrating for both of them. Jack had rigged up a system of pulleys and counterweights to help support some of Ember's weight, while she tried to stand and move around the workshop. The dragon could barely lift herself off the ground even with mechanical assistance, and the effort left her breathing heavily and exhausted. "This hopeless," Ember said after collapsing back onto her side after trying to walk just a few steps. Ember too far gone to ever be strong again. "That is not true," Jack insisted while adjusting the pulley system to provide more support. "Your body just needs time to remember what it used to be able to do. Every day will be a little bit easier if we keep trying." But Jack could see that Ember was losing hope, and he knew that her mental state was just as important as her physical condition. A depressed dragon would never have the motivation needed for the long, difficult process of getting healthy again. He needed to find ways to make her want to recover, not just go through the motions, because he asked her to. The breakthrough came when Jack was working on a damaged atmospheric recycler and asked Ember if she knew anything about the internal components. Dragons were intelligent creatures, and he wondered if she might have technical knowledge that could help with repairs. "Thomas taught Ember about machines," she said with the first sign of real interest Jack had seen from her in days. "Dragon riders need to understand their equipment to survive in combat." Jack moved the recycler closer to where Ember was resting and opened up the access panels so she could see inside. "This unit keeps shutting down randomly, and I cannot figure out why. The power flow looks normal, and all the connections seem solid." Ember lifted her head and studied the machinery with focused attention. After several minutes, she pointed with one claw toward a section near the bottom of the unit. "Temperature sensor, there is wrong type for this model. Will cause shutdown when heat levels normal for other sensors, but too high for that 1 inch. Jack looked where she was pointing and realized she was absolutely right. The sensor had been replaced at some point with a part that looked identical but had different specifications. It was a kind of subtle problem that could take hours to diagnose, but Ember had spotted it immediately. "You are brilliant," Jack said with genuine admiration. "How did you see that so quickly?" For the first time since he had known her, Ember seemed pleased with herself. Ember not just big, stupid dragon, like owners said. Ember has good mind for technical problems. This discovery changed everything about their relationship. Jack began bringing more repair projects over to where Ember rested and asking for her opinions on difficult problems. The dragon's knowledge of mechanical systems was extensive, and her ability to spot problems that Jack missed made her feel useful and valued for first time in years. As Ember's mood improved, her willingness to participate in physical therapy also increased. She began trying harder during their exercise sessions and complaining less about the discomfort. Jack could see small improvements in her strength and mobility as the days passed. The other colonists started to notice the changes too. Maria came by the workshop regularly to check on Ember's health and was amazed by the dragon's recovery progress. "Her breathing is much better," she told Jack after examining Ember with her medical scanner. "Her heart rate is stronger, and her muscle tone is definitely improving." Tom Bradley brought fresh vegetables from the agricultural domes and was surprised when Ember began asking technical questions about the growing systems. "She knows more about hydroponics than some of my trained assistants," he admitted to Jack. Maybe having her here is not such a crazy idea after all. Even the children in the colony began spending time in the workshop, listening to Ember tell stories about flying to the clouds of Drakmor and the adventures she had shared with her bonded rider Thomas. The dragon seemed to enjoy having an audience that appreciated her intelligence rather than mocking her appearance. But the real test of Ember's progress came when Jack decided it was time to work on her flying abilities. Dragons were meant to soar through the air, and Jack knew that Ember would never be truly healthy until she could fly again. The problem was that she was still too heavy and weak to lift her own weight even with her powerful wings. Jack spent weeks designing a system that could help Ember practice flying movements without requiring her to actually leave the ground. He built a harness connected to a network of cables and pulleys that could support most of her weight while allowing her wings to move freely. The first time he suggested trying it, Ember was terrified. "What if Ember falls and gets hurt?" she asked while looking nervously at the contraption Jack had built. "The cables will not let you fall," Jack assured her, "and we will start with just small movements to see how it feels." Getting Ember into the harness was a challenge because of her size, but Jack had designed it to be adjustable, and eventually they managed to get her properly secured. When Jack activated the pulley system, Ember felt her weight being lifted for the first time in years, and the sensation brought tears to her large eyes. "Ember feels light again," she whispered in amazement. With most of her weight supported by the cables, Ember was able to spread her wings fully for the first time since Jack had known her. The wings were magnificent even though they were weak from lack of use, and Jack could imagine how impressive she must have looked in flight when she was healthy. The first session lasted only a few minutes because Ember's wing muscles were not strong enough for sustained movement, but it was a start. Over the following days, she practiced spreading and folding her wings while suspended in the harness, and Jack could see her confidence growing with each session. "Ember remembers what it felt like to fly," she told him after a particularly good practice session. "Someday, maybe Ember will fly for real again." "Not someday," Jack replied firmly. "Soon. Your progress has been amazing, and I think you'll be ready to try actual flight much sooner than you think." As Ember's physical condition improved, Jack also worked on her diet and nutrition. He had analyzed the composition of traditional dragon food and discovered that what she had been fed by her previous owners was mostly cheap filler with very little nutritional value. Jack created a new diet plan using supplements and natural foods that would help her lose weight while maintaining her strength. The colony's chemists helped Jack synthesize the vitamins and minerals that dragons needed, and Maria provided medical guidance to make sure the diet changes were safe. Even the children contributed by gathering certain plants that grew wild on Haven's edge and turned out to be beneficial for dragon health. What impressed Jack most about Ember's recovery was not just the physical changes, but the return of her personality and spirit. The depressed, withdrawn creature he had bought at the auction was being replaced by an intelligent, confident dragon who took pride in her abilities and looked forward to each new day. "Jack, why you do all this for Ember?" she asked one evening after a successful practice session with the flying harness. Jack thought about the question for a moment before answering. "Because every living being deserves a chance to be the best version of themselves. You were never broken, Ember. You were just treated badly by people who did not understand what you really are." "What Ember really is?" she asked. "A partner," Jack replied. "Someone who makes the people around her stronger and better just by being herself." Ember was quiet for a long time processing this idea. Then she said something that surprised Jack with its depth and wisdom. Thomas used to say the same thing. He said dragons and humans make each other complete, because humans have hands and tools and creativity, but dragons have strength and flight, and different way of seeing problems. Together, they can do things neither could do alone. Jack realized that this was exactly what had been happening between him and Ember over the past weeks. She had helped him solve mechanical problems he could not have figured out on his own, while he had provided the knowledge and resources she needed to recover her health. They were becoming true partners in the way that dragons and humans had been bonding for generations. The road ahead was still long, and there would be setbacks and challenges, but Jack could see that Ember was going to make a full recovery. More importantly, she was becoming herself again instead of the broken creature her previous owners had tried to turn her into. Haven's Edge was also changing as the colonists began to see Ember as a valuable member of their community, rather than just Jack's expensive mistake. The dragon's technical knowledge and problem-solving abilities were helping with repairs and improvements throughout the settlement, and her stories were providing entertainment and education for the children. Jack looked forward to the day when Ember would be strong enough to fly free through the skies of Haven's Edge, but he also knew that no matter how high she soared, she would always choose to come back home to the people who had seen her true worth when everyone else had given up on her. 3 months had passed since Jack brought Ember to Haven's Edge, and the transformation was remarkable. The dragon had lost nearly half her excess weight, and could now move around the workshop with surprising grace for such a large creature. Her scales had regained their deep red shine, and her eyes burned with intelligence and purpose, instead of the dull sadness that had defined her at the auction. Most importantly, she had made her first successful flight the week before soaring in circles around the colony for almost 10 minutes before landing gracefully in the field behind Jack's workshop. The colonists had gathered to watch that historic flight, and their cheers of amazement and pride had brought tears to both Jack's and Ember's eyes. Children ran alongside her shadow as she flew overhead, and even the most skeptical adults had to admit that Jack's faith in the dragon had been completely justified. Ember was no longer seen as an expensive mistake, but as a valued member of their small community. Jack was in the workshop that morning calibrating a new atmospheric processor when his communication system started beeping with an urgent priority signal. He activated the display and saw the worried face of Captain Riley, who commanded the colony's small security force. "Jack, we have a problem," Riley said without any preliminary greeting. "Long-range sensors are picking up a Chronari battle fleet approaching our system, and they are definitely heading straight for Haven's Edge." Jack felt his blood turn cold at this news. The Chronari were one of the most aggressive military species in the galaxy, and they were known for their brutal treatment of human colonies. Their arrival could only mean trouble for everyone on Haven's Edge. How long until they arrived? Jack asked while his mind raced through possible explanations for why the Chronari would be interested in their remote world. 6 hours, maybe 7, Riley replied. "The fleet consists of at least 12 ships, including what looks like a heavy cruiser. We are trying to establish communication, but so far they are not responding to our calls." Ember had been listening to the conversation from her resting area, and Jack could see concern in her large eyes. Dragons had excellent hearing, and she understood the implications of Chronari fleet arrival just as well as any human. "What do Chronari want with a small colony like Haven's Edge?" she asked after Jack ended the communication. "I do not know," Jack replied honestly. "We do not have anything here that would interest them. No valuable minerals, no strategic location, no military significance." But even as he said those words, Jack began to suspect that he might know exactly why the Chronari had come. Word traveled fast through the galaxy's communication networks, and news of Ember's recovery had probably reached many worlds by now. A healthy battle dragon would be extremely valuable to a warrior culture like the Chronari. Jack's worst fears were confirmed when the Chronari fleet arrived and immediately took up positions around Haven's Edge in a clear show of force. The lead ship transmitted a message demanding that the colony's leaders meet with their commander within 1 hour or face the consequences of their displeasure. The meeting took place in the colony's small administrative building with Captain Riley representing the security forces, Mayor Peterson speaking for the civilian government, and Jack attending because he suspected this was somehow connected to Ember. The Chronari commander who materialized on the communication screen was exactly what Jack had expected to see. General Voss was a typical Chronari warrior, with gray, scaled-skinned multiple scars from old battles, and the kind of arrogant bearing that came from a lifetime of taking whatever he wanted by force. His uniform was decorated with medals and rank insignia that probably represented dozens of conquered worlds and subjugated peoples. "I am General Voss of the Chronari 3rd Battle Fleet," he announced in accented but clear galactic common. "Your pathetic little colony has something that belongs in the hands of warriors, not farmers and mechanics. Haven's Edge is a peaceful settlement." Mayor Peterson replied with more courage than Jack would have expected from the mild-mannered administrator. "We have no military assets or strategic resources that would interest the Chronari Empire." General Voss laughed, and the sound was harsh and unpleasant. "Do not insult my intelligence, human. My sources tell me that you harbor a recovered battle dragon that was recently purchased from a Nexus Prime auction. Such a creature should serve in glorious combat, not waste away on this insignificant world." Jack felt his heart sink as his suspicions were confirmed. Somehow the Chronari had learned about Ember's recovery and decided that they wanted her for their own purposes. The thought of what they might do to her made him angry in a way he had not felt since his military days. "The dragon you are referring to was legally purchased and is the private property of one of our citizens," Captain Riley said, while trying to maintain a diplomatic tone. "Even if we were willing to discuss a sale, the decision would not be ours to make." "Sale?" General Voss laughed again. "You misunderstand the situation, Captain. I am not here to negotiate or make purchases. I am here to claim what rightfully belongs to warriors. Your dragon will serve the Chronari Empire, or your colony will suffer the consequences." The threat was clear, and everyone in the room understood that Haven's Edge had no way to resist a Chronari battle fleet. Their small security force consisted of a few dozen lightly armed personnel, who were trained more for dealing with wildlife and equipment failures than military combat. The colony's only weapons were hunting rifles and emergency flares. "We need time to consider your request," Mayor Peterson said in a last desperate attempt to buy time to think of alternatives. "You have 2 hours, General Voss replied. "Bring the dragon to landing pad 3, or we will come and take it ourselves. And believe me, you do not want Chronari soldiers searching your colony for something they want." The communication ended, leaving the 3 humans staring at each other in shocked silence. They all knew that resisting the Chronari demand would result in the destruction of their colony, and probably the deaths of many innocent people. But the thought of handing Ember over to creatures who would certainly mistreat her was equally unbearable. "We have to give her to them," Mayor Peterson said finally. "I hate it, but we cannot sacrifice 200 lives for one dragon no matter how much we care about her." Jack understood the mayor's logic, but he also knew that there had to be another way. Ember had been through too much suffering already, and she deserved better than to be handed over to another set of abusive owners who would see her only as a weapon. "Let me talk to her first," Jack said. "She has a right to know what is happening, and maybe she will have ideas about how to handle this situation." The walk back to his workshop felt like the longest journey of Jack's life. He dreaded having to tell Ember that once again she was going to be taken away from people who cared about her and given to those who would exploit her abilities. When he entered the workshop, she took one look at his face and immediately understood that something terrible had happened. "Chronari want Ember," she said simply. "How did you know?" Ember not stupid. "Chronari always want dragon for war." News of Ember's recovery probably spread through galaxy faster than Jack expected. Jack sat down on his usual crate and tried to find words to explain the impossible situation they faced. "The colony cannot fight a Chronari battle fleet, Ember. If we refuse their demand, they will attack and people will die. So Ember must go with them to save colony. That is what the mayor thinks, but I am not willing to give up that easily. There has to be another way." Ember was quiet for several minutes, thinking about their options. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and determined in a way that surprised Jack. "Ember will go with Chronari." "No, absolutely not. I will not let them take you after everything we have been through together." Jack listened to Ember carefully, she said while moving closer, so she could look directly into his eyes. "Ember will go with Chronari, but not the way they expect. Ember has planned, but need Jack to trust and help." Despite his fear and anger, Jack found himself listening as Ember explained what she had in mind. Her plan was dangerous and required perfect timing, but it might be their only chance to save both the colony and her freedom. More importantly, it would require Jack to do something he had sworn never to do again. "You are asking me to become a soldier again," Jack said after she finished explaining her idea. Ember asking Jack to be partner like Thomas was partner. Sometimes partners must fight together to protect what they love. Jack looked around his workshop at all the tools and equipment he used to build and repair things instead of destroying them. He had come to Haven's Edge to escape his past as a military engineer, but now that past might be the only thing that could save his future. The risk to you is enormous, Jack said. If this plan fails, the Chronari will probably kill you. If plan fails, Chronari will take Ember anyway, and make her fight their wars until she dies in battle. At least this way Ember chooses own fate. Jack realized that Ember was right, and that her plan might actually work if they could execute it properly, but it would require him to contact people he had not spoken to in years, and ask them to risk their lives for a dragon they had never met and a colony they had never heard of. I will need to send some messages, Jack said finally, and we will have to be very careful about what we tell the Chronari when they come to collect you. Ember understands. But first Jack must promise something. What? Promise that no matter what happens, Jack will remember that Ember chose this path freely. Ember not victim anymore. Ember is partner who fights for family and home. Jack felt tears forming in his eyes as he made that promise, because he understood that Ember had found something worth fighting for in their small colony. She was no longer a broken creature he had bought at auction, but a proud dragon who would do anything to protect the people who had given her back her dignity and purpose. The next 2 hours would determine whether Jack's faith in human ingenuity and dragon courage could overcome Chronari arrogance and brutality. As he began sending coded messages to old contacts he had not communicated with in years, Jack wondered if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life or finally put his skills to their best possible use. The coded messages Jack sent out went to 15 different people scattered across the Outer Rim worlds, and every one of them was someone he had served with during his years as a military engineer for Earth Defense Forces. These were men and women who had left military service for various reasons, but still maintained contact through an unofficial network of former soldiers who had chosen civilian life over continued warfare. Within an hour, responses began coming back, and Jack was amazed by how quickly his old comrades agreed to help without even knowing the full details of what he was asking. Captain Lisa Chin commanded a heavily modified cargo hauler that looked like civilian transport, but carried military-grade weapons and shields. Commander Pete Williams ran a mining operation that was actually a cover for a small fleet of combat-capable ships. Lieutenant Sarah Kim had become a freelance pilot, but her ship was equipped with stealth technology that made it nearly invisible to most sensors. The plan Jack and Ember had developed was complicated and required precise timing, but it was their only chance to save both the colony and Ember's freedom. When General Voss arrived to collect his prize, he would find a dragon who appeared to be cooperating, but was actually preparing to turn the tables on her captors. Jack spent the remaining time before the deadline installing a small but sophisticated communications device inside the decorative collar that Ember wore around her neck. The device was disguised to look like ornamental metalwork, but it contained enough processing power to coordinate with multiple ships and transmit real-time tactical information. Remember, Ember, the most important thing is to act like you have given up hope, Jack said, while making final adjustments to the hidden communicator. The Chronari need to believe they have won completely, or they will be suspicious. Ember understands. Will be sad, broken dragon again, until time comes to fight. At exactly 2 hours after their ultimatum expired, a Chronari shuttle landed at Haven's Edge with General Voss and a squad of armed soldiers. The general was clearly expecting resistance and seemed disappointed when Mayor Peterson and Captain Riley met him with formal surrender documents. Your cooperation is wise, General Voss said while reviewing the papers. Resistance would have been costly for your people and pointless since the outcome was never in doubt. Jack appeared with Ember walking slowly beside him on a lead chain that was actually another piece of carefully prepared equipment. The dragon looked dejected and defeated exactly as they had planned, but Jack could see the intelligence burning in her eyes as she observed everything around her. So this is the famous recovered dragon, General Voss said while walking around Ember and examining her like she was a piece of equipment. She is impressive now that she has lost the excess weight, but I can see why she was unwanted before. The spirit has been broken out of her by poor treatment. She is still recovering from years of abuse, Jack said while trying to keep his voice neutral. "But her flying ability and intelligence are fully restored." "Excellent. The Krenari Empire will find good use for both qualities." What General Voss did not know was that Jack's old military contacts had been positioning their ships throughout the system for the past hour, using flight paths that looked like normal commercial traffic. Lisa Chen's cargo hauler had docked at the orbital transfer station claiming engine trouble. Pete Williams' mining ships were conducting a mineral survey of the outer asteroids. Sarah Kim's stealth scout was completely invisible and following the Krenari fleet at close range. As Ember was loaded into the Krenari shuttle, Jack activated the first phase of their plan by transmitting a coded signal through the communicator in her collar. The message went simultaneously to all 15 ships in his makeshift fleet and confirmed that the operation was beginning. The shuttle returned to the Krenari flagship with Ember, secured in a holding area that the aliens thought was escape-proof. But dragons were far more intelligent and resourceful than most species realized, and Ember had been studying the ship's systems from the moment she came aboard. General Voss brought her to the bridge where he planned to demonstrate his new acquisition to his officers. "Behold the newest weapon in our arsenal," he announced proudly. "A genuine Drakmor battle dragon, fully recovered and ready for combat." "She looks weak and defeated," observed one of the junior officers. "Are you certain she will fight effectively?" "All dragons fight when properly motivated," General Voss replied. "Fear and pain are excellent teachers for creatures that think they are too proud to serve." This comment made Ember's eyes flash with anger, but she continued to act submissive while secretly activating the communications device with a specific tongue movement Jack had taught her. The signal went out to all the ships in Jack's hidden fleet, confirming that she was ready for the next phase. What happened next caught the Krenari completely by surprise. Sarah Kim's stealth scout suddenly appeared directly behind the flagship and fired a concentrated burst at their main engines, disabling their ability to maneuver. At the same time, Lisa Chen's cargo hauler dropped its disguise and began attacking the smaller ships in the Krenari fleet with weapons that were far more powerful than anything a civilian vessel should have carried. The battle was fierce but brief because Jack's people had the advantage of surprise and superior tactics. Pete Williams' mining ships had been positioned to attack from multiple directions, while the Krenari were focused on the more obvious threats. Within minutes, 3 of the enemy ships were disabled, and the rest were taking heavy damage. But the real surprise came when Ember broke free from her restraints using strength that the Krenari had not realized she possessed and began systematically destroying the flagship's internal systems. Her knowledge of spacecraft design allowed her to target exactly the components that would cause maximum damage while keeping the ship intact enough to prevent it from exploding. "Impossible!" General Voss shouted as alarms began sounding throughout his ship. The dragon was secured in maximum restraint fields. Ember was never truly captured, she replied in perfect galactic common, while ripping out another critical control panel. Ember was hunting. The general tried to shoot her with his sidearm, but discovered that dragon scales were much tougher than he had expected. Ember grabbed him with one claw and held him up so he could see the destruction his fleet was suffering through the bridge windows. "You made mistake thinking Ember was just weapon to be used," she said, while General Voss struggled helplessly in her grip. "Ember is partner who chooses her own battles and fights for people who respect her." Jack's voice came through the communicator in Ember's collar as his ship approached the disabled flagship. "Ember, are you ready to come home?" "More than ready," she replied. Ember thinks these Krenari need time to reconsider their approach to acquiring dragons. The aftermath of the battle was swift and decisive. The surviving Krenari ships surrendered when they realized their flagship was captured, and their general was at the mercy of a very angry dragon. Jack's fleet had performed exactly as planned with no casualties on their side and minimal damage to their ships. When Jack boarded the Krenari flagship to retrieve Ember, he found her calmly discussing the finer points of spaceship design with a terrified bridge crew who were amazed by her technical knowledge. General Voss was secured in his own brig and looking much less arrogant than he had a few hours earlier. "I told you there had to be another way," Jack said with a smile as he removed the restraint devices the Krenari had used on Ember. "Jack's plan worked perfectly," Ember replied. though Ember thinks maybe next time we should warn Colony what we are planning. So they do not worry so much. The return to Haven's Edge was triumphant, with the entire colony turning out to welcome home their dragon and celebrate the unexpected victory over the Kronari fleet. Many of Jack's old military friends decided to stay for a few days to meet Ember and see the community that had inspired such loyalty and courage. She is remarkable, Lisa Chin told Jack, while watching Ember demonstrate her flying abilities for a group of fascinated children. I have never seen a dragon choose to fight for humans instead of being forced into service. That is because we never tried to own her, Jack replied. We just gave her the chance to be herself again, and she chose to stay with us. Over the following weeks, word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy, and Haven's Edge began receiving visitors from many different worlds. Some came to see the dragon who had outsmarted the Kronari, while others wanted to meet the human mechanic, who had turned a worthless auction purchase into a legendary partnership. But the most important visitors were the ones who brought damaged or mistreated creatures, seeking the same kind of help that Jack had given to Ember. Dragons who had been abused by cruel owners, creatures from other worlds who had been abandoned or neglected, and even some mechanical beings who needed repair and restoration. Jack's workshop expanded into a full rehabilitation center, with Ember serving as both assistant and inspiration for the other creatures they helped. The dragon story proved that no being was beyond redemption if someone was willing to see the potential and help them heal. Do you ever regret buying me at that auction? Ember asked Jack one evening as they watched the sunset from a hill behind the workshop. Never, Jack replied without hesitation. You have made my life and this entire colony better in ways I never could have imagined, even though Ember was expensive and caused trouble with Kronari. Especially because of that, you showed all of us what it means to fight for family and choose your own destiny instead of accepting what others say you should be. Ember stretched her wings and prepared for her evening flight around the colony perimeter, a routine she had established to make sure their home was safe and secure. Ember thinks maybe the galaxy needs more partnerships like ours. Dragons and humans working together as equals instead of masters and servants. Jack watched her soar into the darkening sky and knew that she was right. The bond they had formed was changing how people throughout the galaxy thought about relationships between different species, and proving that the greatest strength came not from domination, but from mutual respect and shared purpose. Haven's Edge had become more than just a small frontier colony. It had become a symbol of hope for every creature that had been written off as worthless, and every being that dreamed of finding their true place in the universe. And at the center of it all was the partnership between a human mechanic who saw potential in broken things, and a dragon who had chosen to call him family.